George Washington to John Hancock, 4th to 5th August, 1775. To John Hancock, Camp at Cambridge, August 4th to 5th, 1775. Sir, I am to acknowledge the receipt of your favour of the 24th of July, accompanied by 284 commissions, which are yet much short of the necessary number. I am much honoured by the confidence reposed in me of appointing the several officers recommended in mine of the 10th of the last month, and shall endeavour to select such persons as are best qualified to fill those important posts. General Thomas has accepted his commission, and I have heard nothing of his retirement since, so that I suppose he is satisfied. In the renewal of these commissions, some difficulties occur, in which I should be glad to know the pleasure of the Honourable Congress. The general officers of Massachusetts have regiments, those of Connecticut have both regiments and companies, and the other field officers have companies each. From Rhode Island, the general officer has no regiment, but the field officers have companies. But I do not find they have, or expect, pay under more than one commission. Should the commissions now to be delivered pursue these different establishments, there will be a distinction between general and field officers of the same rank. In order to put New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island upon a line with Connecticut, it would be necessary to dismiss a number of officers in possession of commissions without any fault of theirs. On the other hand, to bring the Connecticut generals and field officers to the same scale with the others will add to the number of officers, and may be deemed inconsistent with the terms on which they entered into the service, although it adds nothing to the expense except in the article of provisions. Upon the whole, it is a case which I would wish the Honourable Congress to consider and determine. Colonel Gridley of this province, who is at the head of the artillery, has the rank of Major General from the Provincial Congress. Will it be proper to renew his commission here in the same manner? It is proper here to remark that, in this case, he will take rank of all the Brigadier Generals and even the Major Generals whose commissions are subsequent in date and can answer no good purpose, but may be productive of many bad consequences. These are matters of some importance, but I am embarrassed with a difficulty of a superior kind. The estimate made in Congress supposed all the regiments to be formed upon one establishment, but they are different in different provinces, and even vary in the same province in some particulars. In Massachusetts, some regiments have 10 companies, others 11. The establishment of the former is 590 men, officers included. Of the latter, 649. The establishment of Rhode Island and New Hampshire is 590 to a regiment, officers included. Connecticut has 1,000 men to a regiment. Should the Massachusetts regiments be completed, with the new levies from Rhode Island and Connecticut, and the riflemen, the number will exceed 22,000. If they should not be completed, as each regiment is fully officered, there will be a heavy expense to the public without an adequate service. The reduction of some of them seems to be necessary, and yet is a matter of much delicacy, as we are situated. I most earnestly request it may be taken into immediate consideration, and the time and mode of doing it pointed out by the Honourable Congress. By an estimate I have made from the general return, when the new levies arrive and the regiments are completed, there will be 24,450 men on the pay and provision of the United Colonies. Some of the recruiting officers who have been out on that service have returned with very little success, so that we may safely conclude the number of 2,064 now wanting to complete will rather increase than diminish. There are the regiment of artillery consisting of 493 men, and one under Colonel Sargent who has not received any commission, although he had orders to raise a regiment from the Provincial Congress here, which are not included in the above estimate. This last regiment consists of 234 men by the last return, but a company has since joined. By adverting to the general return, which I have the honour of enclosing, it will be seen what regiments are most deficient. If the Congress does not choose to point out the particular regiments, but the provinces in which the reduction is to be made, the several congresses and assemblies may be the proper channel to conduct this business, which I should also conceive the most advisable from their better acquaintance with the merits, terms, and time of service of the respective officers. Reducing some regiments, and, with the privates thereof, filling up others would certainly be the best method of accomplishing this work, if it were practicable. But the experiment is dangerous, as the Massachusetts men, under the privilege of choosing their own officers, do not conceive themselves bound if those officers are disbanded. As General Gage is making preparations for winter, by contracting for quantities of coal, it will suggest to us the propriety of extending our views to that season. I have directed that such huts as have been lately made of boards should be done in such a manner that, if necessary, they may serve for covering during the winter. But I need not enlarge upon the variety of necessities, such as clothing, fuel, and so forth, both exceedingly scarce and difficult to be procured, which that season must bring with it if the army, or any considerable part of it, is to remain embodied. From the inactivity of the enemy since the arrival of their whole reinforcement, their continual addition to their lines, and many other circumstances, I am inclined to think that, finding us so well prepared to receive them, the plan of operations is varied, and they mean, by regular approaches, to bombard us out of our present line of defence, or are waiting in expectation that the colonies must sink under the weight of the expense, or that the prospect of a winter campaign will so discourage the troops as to break up our army. If they haven't some such expectations, the issue of which they are determined to wait, I cannot account for the delay, when their strength is lessened every day by sickness, desertions, and little skirmishes. Of these last, we have had only 2 worthy of notice. Having some reason to suspect they were extending their lines at Charlestown, I last Saturday evening ordered some of the riflemen down to make a discovery or bring off a prisoner. They were accidentally discovered sooner than they expected by the guard coming to relieve, and obliged to fire upon them. We have reason to believe they killed several. They brought in 2 prisoners whose account, confirmed by some other circumstances, removed my suspicions in part. Since that time we have on each side drawn in our sentries, and there have been scattering fires along the line. This evening we have heard of 3 captains who have been taken off by the riflemen, and 1 killed by a cannon shot from Roxbury, besides several privates. But as the intelligence is not direct, I only mention it as a report which deserves credit. The other happened at the lighthouse, a number of workmen having been sent down to repair it, with a guard of 22 Marines and a subaltern. Major Tupper last Monday morning about 2 o'clock landed there with about 300 men, attacked them, killed the officer and 4 privates, but being detained by the tide, in his return he was attacked by several boats, but he happily got through with the loss of 1 man killed and another wounded. The remainder of the ministerial troops, 3 of whom are badly wounded, he brought off prisoners with 10 Tories, all of whom are on their way to Springfield jail. The riflemen in these skirmishes lost 1 man, who we hear is a prisoner in Boston jail. The enemy in return endeavored to surprise our guard at Roxbury, but they, being apprised of it by a deserter, had time to prepare for it. but by some negligence or misconduct in the officer of the guard, they burned the George Tavern on the neck, and have every day since been cannonading us from their lines, both at Roxbury and Charlestown, but with no other effect than the loss of 2 men. On our part, except straggling fires from the small arms about the lines, which we endeavour to restrain, we have made little or no return. Our situation in the article of powder is much more alarming than I had the most distant idea of. Having desired a return to be made out on my arrival of the ammunition, I found 300 3 1/2 barrels of powder mentioned as in the store. But on ordering a new supply of cartridges yesterday, I was informed to my very great astonishment that there were no more than 36 barrels of the Massachusetts store, which, with the stock of Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Connecticut, makes 9,937 pounds, not more than 9 rounds a man. As there had been no consumption of powder, since that could in any degree account for such a deficiency, I was very particular in my inquiries, and found that the Committee of Supplies, not being sufficiently acquainted with the nature of a return or misapprehending my request, sent in an account of all the ammunition which had been collected by the province, so that the report included not only what was in hand, but what had been spent. Upon discovering this mistake, I immediately went up to confer with the Speaker of the House of Representatives upon some measures to obtain a supply from the neighbouring townships in such a manner as might prevent our poverty being known, as it is a secret of too great consequence to be divulged in the general court, some individual of which might perhaps indiscreetly suffer it to escape him, so as to find its way to the enemy, the consequences of which are terrible even in idea. I shall also write to the governors of Rhode Island and Connecticut and the Committee of Safety in New Hampshire on this subject, urging in the most forcible terms the necessity of an immediate supply if in their power. I need not enlarge on our melancholy situation. It is sufficient that the existence of the army and the salvation of the country depend upon something being done for our relief, both speedy and effectual, and that our situation be kept a profound secret. In the enclosures, I send the allowance of provisions and other articles made by the provinces of Connecticut and Massachusetts. The mode and quantity are different from what has fallen within my experience, and I am confident must prove very wasteful and expensive. If any alteration can be safely made, which I much doubt, there might be a great saving to the public. A gentleman of my family, assisted by a deserter who has some skill in fortification, has, by my direction, sketched out 2 drafts of our respective lines at Charlestown and Roxbury, which, with the explanations, will convey some idea of our situation, and, I hope, prove acceptable to the members of the Honourable Congress. They are the enclosures. Since I had the honour of addressing you last, I have been applied to by a committee of the General Court for a detachment of the army to protect the inhabitants of the eastern parts of this province from some apprehended depredations on their coasts. I could have wished to have complied with their request, but after due consideration and consulting the general officers, together with those members of Congress who are here, I thought it my duty to excuse myself. The application and my answer are the enclosures, which I hope will be approved by the Honourable Congress. Since I began this letter, the original of which the enclosure is a copy fell into my hands. As the writer is a person of some note in Boston, and it contains some advice of importance not mentioned by others, I thought proper to forward it as I received it. By comparing the handwriting with another letter, it appears the writer is one Belcher Noyes, a person probably known to some of the gentlemen delegates from this province, who can determine from his principles and character what credit is due to him. The army is now formed into 3 grand divisions, under the command of Generals Ward, Lee, and Putnam, each division into 2 brigades, consisting of about 6 regiments each, commanded by Generals Thomas and Spencer at Roxbury, Heath at Cambridge, Sullivan and Green at Winter Hill. By this you will please to observe there is a deficiency of 1 brigadier general, occasioned by Mr. Pomeroy's not acting under his commission, which I beg may be filled up as soon as possible. I observe the Honourable Congress have also favoured me with the appointment of 3 brigade majors. I presume they have, or intend to appoint, the rest soon, as they cannot be unacquainted that one is necessary to each brigade, and in a newly raised army it will be an office of great duty and service. General Gage has at length liberated the people of Boston, who land in numbers at Chelsea every day. The terms on which the passes are granted, as to money, effects, and provisions, correspond with Mr. Noyes's letter. We have several reports that General Gage is dismantling Castle William and bringing all the cannon up to town. But upon a very particular inquiry, accounts are so various that I cannot ascertain the truth of it. I am sorry to be under a necessity of making such frequent examples among the officers, where a sense of honour and the interest of their country might be expected to make punishment unnecessary. Since my last, Captain Parker of Massachusetts, for frauds both in pay and provisions, and Captain Gardner of Rhode Island, for cowardice in running away from his guard on an alarm, have been broken. As nothing can be more fatal to an army than crimes of this kind, I am determined by every motive of reward and punishment to prevent them in future. On the first instant, a chief of the Caughnawaga tribe, who lives about 6 miles from Montreal, came in here accompanied by Colonel Bailey of Cohos. His accounts of the temper and disposition of the Indians are very favorable. He says they have been strongly solicited by Governor Carleton to engage against us, but his nation is totally averse. Threats, as well as entreaties, have been used without effect. That the Canadians are well disposed to the English colonies, and if any expedition is meditated against Canada, the Indians in that quarter will give all their assistance. I have endeavoured to cherish these favourable dispositions, and have recommended to him to cultivate them on his return. What I have said I enforced with a present which I understood would be agreeable to him, and as he is represented to be a man of weight and consequence in his own tribe, I flatter myself his visit will have a good effect. His accounts of Governor Carleton's force and situation at St. John's correspond with what we have already had from that quarter. The accession of Georgia to the measures of the Congress is a happy event, and must give sincere pleasure to every friend of America. August 5th. We have accounts this morning of 2 explosions at the castle, so that its destruction may now be supposed certain. I have this morning been alarmed with information that 2 gentlemen from Philadelphia, Mr. Hitchborne and Captain White, with letters for General Lee and myself, have been taken by Captain Ayscough at Rhode Island, the letters intercepted and sent forward to Boston with the bearers as prisoners. That the captain exulted much in the discoveries he had made, and my informer, who was also in the boat but released, understood them to be letters of consequence. I have therefore dispatched the express immediately back, though I had before resolved to detain him until Fessenden's return. I shall be anxious until I am relieved from the suspense I am in as to the contents of those letters. It is exceedingly unfortunate that gentlemen should choose to travel the only road on which there is danger. Let the event of this be what it will, I hope It will serve as a general caution against trusting any letters that way in future. Nothing of consequence has occurred in the camp these 2 days. The inhabitants of Boston continue coming out at Chelsea, but under a new restriction that no men shall come out without special license, which is refused to all mechanics since the Tory labourers were taken at the lighthouse. I have the honour to be, sir, your most obedient, obliged, and very humble servant, George Washington. Samuel Chase to Benjamin Franklin, 4th of August, 1775. Dear Sir, Colonel Harrison yesterday having informed me that a constitutional post office is now established, and that you are appointed the head of that department, the present deputies. I doubt not will be removed, particularly in this city and Baltimore town. Give me leave to recommend Mr. York as a rider from Philadelphia. I never heard an imputation on his character, and we have experienced his diligent sobriety, punctuality, and obliging behaviour. Our letters have been frequently trusted to his care, and always delivered. I cannot therefore but wish he may be employed. I am, sir, with respect, your most obedient servant, Samuel Chase. General Orders, 4th of August, 1775. Headquarters, Cambridge. Parole, London. Countersign, Ireland. It is with indignation and shame, the General observes, that notwithstanding the repeated orders which have been given to prevent the firing of guns in and about camp, that it is daily and hourly practised, that contrary to all orders, straggling soldiers do still pass the guards, and fire at a distance, where there is not the least probability of hurting the enemy, and where no other end is answered. But to waste ammunition, expose themselves to the ridicule of the enemy, and keep their own camps harassed by frequent and continual alarms, to the hurt of every good soldier, who is thereby disturbed of his natural rest, and will at length never be able to distinguish between a real and a false alarm. For these reasons, it is in the most peremptory manner forbid any person or persons whatsoever, under any pretence, to pass the outguards, unless authorized by the commanding officer of that part of the lines, signified in writing, which must be shown to the officer of the guard as they pass. Any person offending in this particular will be considered in no other light than as a common enemy, and the guards will have orders to fire upon them as such. The commanding officer of every regiment is to direct that every man in his regiment is made acquainted with orders to the end, that no one may plead ignorance, and that all may be apprised of the consequence of disobedience. The colonels of regiments and commanding officers of corps to order the rolls of every company to be called twice a day, and every man's ammunition examined at evening roll calling, and such as are found to be deficient to be confined. The guards are to apprehend all persons firing guns near their posts, whether townsmen or soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Loami Baldwin to George Washington, 4th of August, 1775. Chelsea, Massachusetts, 5 o'clock post meridium. May it please your Excellency. This covers the observations as usual. Captain Morton, who came out of Boston yesterday in the afternoon, informs that a little before he came away, the generals went over the ferry to Bunker Hill to consult, as it was said, upon the propriety of taking possession of a considerable eminence in this town, a little west of Winnisimmett Ferry, commonly known by the name of Green's Hill. And I am informed by some persons who left Boston this morning that the soldiers told them, as they were coming away, that they were fools to go to Chelsea, for tomorrow they, the regulars, were going to take possession of that place, and burn and destroy all before them. and this, it was said, was to be done in consequence of the determination of the Council of War held yesterday on Bunker Hill. This intelligence is just as I received it, and Your Excellency will pay what attention to it you think proper. I feel myself under indispensable obligations to transmit to Your Excellency all the intelligence I can get from our enemy, and you will be pleased to excuse it if I should sometimes trouble you with imperfect accounts and matters of little consequence, as I cannot tell what may or what may not prove true. I am this moment informed that a man of war and one schooner, the schooner commanded by Captain Dawson, have just come in with 2 sloops and 1 schooner, which I suppose they have piratically seized and made prizes of. I hope I shall be able to give a more full account of this affair tomorrow. Nothing further extraordinary. I subscribe myself, Your Excellency's most obedient servant, Lomi Baldwin, Lieutenant Colonel. George Washington to Nicholas Cook, 4th of August, 1775. Cambridge, August 4th, 1775. Sir, I was yesterday favoured with yours of the 31st of July. We have yet no certain account of the fleet which sailed out of Boston on the 25th, but if our conjectures and information are just, we may expect to hear of it every hour. I am now, sir, in strict confidence to acquaint you that our necessities in the articles of powder and lead are so great as to require an immediate supply. I must earnestly entreat you will fall upon some measures to forward every pound of each in the colony which can possibly be spared. It is not within the propriety and safety of such a correspondence to say what I might upon this subject. It is sufficient that the case loudly calls for the most strenuous exertions of every friend of his country, and does not admit the least delay. No quantity, however small, is beneath notice, and should any arrive, I beg it may be forwarded as soon as possible. But a supply of this kind is so precarious, not only from the danger of the enemy, but the opportunity of purchasing, that I have revolved in my mind every other possible chance, and listened to every proposition on this subject which could give the smallest hope. Among others, I have had one made which has some weight with me, as well as with the general officers to whom I have proposed it. One Harris is lately come from Bermuda, where there is a very considerable magazine of powder in a remote part of the island, and the inhabitants well disposed not only to our cause in general, but to assist in this enterprise in particular. We understand there are 2 armed vessels in your province, commanded by men of known activity and spirit, one of which it is proposed to dispatch on this errand, with such other assistance as may be requisite. Harris is to go along as the conductor of the enterprise, and to avail ourselves of his knowledge of the island, but without any command. I am very sensible that at first view this project may appear hazardous, and its success must depend upon the concurrence of many circumstances. But we are in a situation which requires us to run all risks. No danger is to be considered when put in competition with the magnitude of the cause and the absolute necessity we are under of increasing our stock. Enterprises which appear chimerical often prove successful for that very circumstance. Common sense and prudence will suggest vigilance and care where the danger is plain and obvious. But where little danger is apprehended, the more the enemy is found unprepared, and consequently there is the fairer prospect of success. Mr. Brown has been mentioned to me as a very proper person to consult upon this occasion. You will judge of the propriety of communicating it to him in part or in the whole, and as soon as possible favour me with your sentiments and the steps you may have taken to forward it. If no immediate and safe opportunity offers, you will please to do it by express. Should it be inconvenient to part with one of the armed vessels, perhaps some other might be fitted out, or you could devise some other mode of executing this plan, so that in case of a disappointment, the vessel might proceed to some other island to purchase. My last letter from the Honorable Continental Congress recommends my procuring from the colonies of Connecticut and Rhode Island a quantity of tow cloth for the purpose of making Indian shirts for the men, many of whom are very destitute of clothing. A pattern will be sent you, and I must request you to give the necessary directions throughout your government that all the cloth of the above kind may be bought up for this use, and suitable persons set to work to make it up. As soon as any number is made worth the conveyance, you will please to direct them to be forwarded. It is designed as a species of uniform, both cheap and convenient. We have had no transactions of any consequence in either camp since my last, but what are in the public papers, and are related with tolerable accuracy. The enemy still continue strengthening their lines, and we have reason to believe intend to bombard our lines with the hope of forcing us out of them. Our poverty in ammunition prevents our making a suitable return. Since writing the above, Colonel Porter has undertaken to assist in the matter, or to provide some suitable person to accompany Harris to you, who will communicate all circumstances to you. George Washington to a committee of the Massachusetts Council, 4th of August, 1775. To a committee of the Massachusetts Council, Camp at Cambridge, 4th of August, 1775. Gentlemen, enclosed. You have an extract of such parts of my instructions as I conceive you want to be informed of. I did not know, as the proceedings of the Congress are not yet made public, how far I was at liberty to communicate what I have. Further I cannot go at present. I beg the favor of you to make a tender of my best respects to your honorable board, and do me the justice to believe that I am, gentlemen, your most obedient and most humble servant, George Washington Postscript. There are now at this place 2 or 3 surgeons from Philadelphia, very powerfully recommended to me by some of the delegates of the Continental Congress to be provided for. If you should want such, and will signify the same, I will inform them thereof. They are strangers to me, but have the appearance of gentlemen, and are strongly recommended as men of knowledge in their profession. Yours, and so forth. George Washington to Lewis Morris, 4th of August, 1775. To Lewis Morris, Camp at Cambridge, 4th of August, 1775. Dear Sir, I have been favoured with your letter of the 18th of the last month by Messrs. Ogden and Burr, and wish it was in my power to do that justice to the merits of those gentlemen which you think them entitled to. Whenever it is, I shall not be unmindful of your recommendations. The 2 or 3 appointments with which I have been honoured by the Congress were partly engaged before I received your letter, and you will please to recollect that the ultimate appointment of all other officers is vested in the governments in which the regiments were originally raised. I can venture to pronounce, therefore, that few commissions in this army will be disposed of out of the 4 New England governments, the good policy and justice of which you may judge of as well as I can. As volunteers from any other colonies, however deserving they may be of notice, or to be considered on account of the expense which they are put to, will stand little chance whilst there is an application from any person of the government from whence the regiment came. Admitting this to be the case, and I believe hardly anyone will doubt it, Had not the Congress better reserve these appointments in their own hands? It will be putting the matter upon a much larger foundation, and giving merit a better chance, nor do I see any inconvenience arising from it, as it is highly presumable that, during the continuance of these disturbances, the Congress will be chiefly sitting or acting by a committee, from whence commissions might be as easily obtained as from a provincial assembly or Congress. I have taken the liberty of suggesting this matter, as I conceive the service will be infinitely promoted thereby, as merit only, without a regard to country, will entitle a man to preferment when, and so often as, vacancies may happen. Having written fully to the Congress respecting the state of public affairs, I shall refer you to that letter, and am, with great regard, dear sir, your most obedient and humble servant, George Washington. George Washington to the New Hampshire Committee of Safety, 4th of August, 1775. Camp at Cambridge. Gentlemen, your public capacity, and the hope that you will be both able and willing to give us some assistance, has led me to make this application. The situation of the army, as to ammunition, is by no means what it ought to be. We have great reason to suspect the enemy very soon intend to bombard our lines, and our stock of powder is so small as, in a great degree, to make our heavy artillery useless. I must therefore request you will exert yourselves to forward whatever can be spared from your province as soon as possible. The necessity is great, the cause is of the last importance. I am therefore persuaded I need use no arguments to quicken your zeal. The smallest quantities are not beneath notice, as a considerable stock may be formed from various collections. Lead and flints are also very scarce. You will therefore furnish all you can spare. Next to making the provision, its being seasonable is of great importance. Every hour in our present situation is critical. Should there be any arrivals in any part of your province with this necessary article, I must request your forwarding all that can possibly be spared out of it. I am, gentlemen, very respectfully, your most obedient and very humble servant, George Washington. George Washington to William Trent, 4th of August, 1775. Camp at Cambridge. Dear Sir, your letter of the 22nd of the last month came to my hands a few days ago. The hurry of business in which General Gates necessarily got involved immediately upon his arrival at this camp put your memorandum out of his head, which was a matter of no consequence, as Colonel Mercer is already fully apprised of every circumstance relative to the sale of his estate. As I have none of the papers with me, I cannot from memory recollect the particulars, or give answers to the several queries you have propounded. But, as I have before observed, a circumstantial account was transmitted to the Colonel before I left Virginia in May. His estate, to the best of my recollection, sold for upwards of £14,000, and was thought scarcely sufficient to answer the mortgages upon it in England and Virginia. It was sold at 12 months' credit in November last, so that no money will be due until next November. Consequently, none can be remitted sooner. Whether in these times of public distress and confusion there can be any collection made, I am unable to say. I am very glad to hear of the acquisition of powder in South Carolina, and am, dear sir, your most obedient and humble servant, George Washington. George Washington to Jonathan Trumbull, Sr., 4 August, 1775. To Jonathan Trumbull, Senior Camp at Cambridge, August 4th, 1775. Sir, I am favoured with yours of the 31st of July, informing me that the new levies were coming forward with all expedition. As the enemy has lain longer inactive than I expected, I hope they will arrive in time to give us their assistance. My last letter from the Honourable Continental Congress recommends my procuring from the colonies of Rhode Island and Connecticut a quantity of tow cloth for the purpose of making Indian or hunting shirts for the men, many of whom are very destitute of clothing. A pattern is herewith sent you, and I must request you to give the necessary directions throughout your government that all the cloth of the above kind may be bought up for this use and suitable persons set to work to make it up. As soon as any number is made worth the conveyance, you will please to direct them to be forwarded. It is designed as a species of uniform, both cheap and convenient. We have had no transactions of any consequence in the camp since my last, but what are in the public papers, and are related with tolerable accuracy. I am now, sir, in strict confidence to acquaint you that our necessities in the articles of powder, lead, and flints are so great as to require an immediate supply. I must earnestly entreat you will fall upon some measures to forward to us every ounce in the province that can possibly be spared. It is not within the propriety or safety of such a correspondence to say what I might upon the subject. It is sufficient that the cause loudly calls for the most strenuous exertions of every friend to his country, and doesn't admit of the least delay. No quantity, however small, is beneath notice, and should any arrive, I beg it may be forwarded to us as fast as possible. This express, having left his horse at Hartford, is under a necessity of going that way. I am, sir, with much regard, your most obedient humble servant, George Washington,